There we are. Okay, today is August the 29th, and we are still in our study of the life of Elijah. And so let us turn to 1 Kings chapter 21, 1 Kings chapter 21. And let's see if I can change the way I view the, maybe not. Okay. Now, as we turn to 1 Kings chapter 21, let me ask you a question. I want you to think about this while you're turning. What would you do for $10 million? Now, answer that honestly. You don't have to tell anybody. Just answer it honestly. What would you do for $10 million? James Patterson and Peter Kim, in their book, The Day America Told the Truth, said that 2/3 of Americans polled would agree to at least one, and some to several, of the following. 25% said they'd abandon their entire family for $10 million. 25% said they abandoned their church. 23% would become prostitutes for a week or more. 6% for $10 million would give up their American citizenship. 6% would leave their spouses. 10% would withhold testimony and let a murderer go free. 7% for $10 million, 7% would kill a stranger. 3% would give up their children for adoption. Frankly, I'm surprised, depending on the day, that last number is not a little higher, but I think you see what this means. So the next time you're in a crowd over 100 people, at least 7 of them are willing to kill you, given enough money. That's a rather sobering thought, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Now, I don't know why it is that we love money as much as we do, but a lot of us think that we don't love money. Or at least if we do love money, the reason that we do is because we don't have very much. We're living paycheck to paycheck. But statistically, the odds are against that. In fact, researchers have discovered the more money that you have, the lower percentage of your money is given away. Let's turn real quickly to, keep your fingers in 1 Kings 21, but let's turn to Ecclesiastes 5:10. Ecclesiastes 5:10. This was written by the richest man that ever lived, or at least one of them. Bonnie, when you get there, would you read that for us, please? Bonnie, are you there?
I am. I'm sorry. I'm trying to get a cat to leave us alone, and now I've lost my place.
Ecclesiastes 5:10.
Does someone else have it?
Well, here, let me just read it. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. Whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with his income. I'm reminded of an example of that back in the 80s. There was a woman who owned a string of hotels. She owned the Empire State Building. She was a billionaire. And yet in September 1989, Leona Mindy Rosenthal Helmsley was convicted of 33 counts of tax evasion. for which she faced the possibility of being sent to prison for 100 years. Ultimately, she wasn't convicted of tax evasion, or she was convicted of tax evasion. She received a 4-year sentence, went to jail in 92, and was released in 94. But according to Time magazine, even though she appeared to be the queen in high-profile ego ad campaigns, she emerged as a penny-pinching tyrant who tried to stiff just about everybody at her trial. No amount of money was too small to fight over. After the sudden death of her only son at age 40 in 1982, she sued and won the lion's share of his estate, $149,000, leaving his 4 children with just $432 each and his widow with $2,171. This in spite of the fact that she was worth billions. So again, whoever loves money never has money enough. Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. And we can see this, I mean, we watch TV and we watch the movies, and whenever there's a murder that takes place, one of 2 incentives for murder is always given: either jealousy or money, right? Either jealousy or money. Looking for, here we go. As we look at today's lesson concerning the vineyard of Naboth, here's the big idea I want us to remember. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. You might be surprised when we get into the story of Naboth that we're talking about money, because what really is the big sin in this chapter, at least according to many of us, I think, would be the murder that takes place. But that murder would not have happened if it wasn't for greed. So that's why we say, watch over your heart with all diligence. So let's begin by looking at 1 Kings 21, and let's read verses 1 through 4, please, Bonnie.
Sometime later, there was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth, the Jezreelite. The vineyard was in Jezreel, close to the palace of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab said to Naboth, "Let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard, or if you prefer, I will pay you whatever it is worth." But Naboth replied, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers." So Ahab went home, sullen and angry, because Naboth, the Jezreelite, had said, "I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers." He lay on his bed sulking and refused to eat.
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. Now, as we begin this story, it's important to consider the context of it. In other words, what's happening in the larger context. In chapter 20, we read of Ahab going to war against an aggressive Syrian king by the name of Ben-Hadad. God sends Ahab a message by way of an unnamed prophet, probably one of the 7,000 that haven't bowed the knee to Baal, and tells the king that God is going to deliver this vast army into his hands, which of course is exactly what happens. Unfortunately for Ben-Hadad, he turned this defeat into a theological problem. And he thought that the only reason that he lost was the fact that Israel's God was stronger in the hills. But if he fought him on the plains, God would give him victory. And so, Bonnie, would you read for us, please, chapter 20, just a page back? chapter 20, verse 28.
The man of God came up and told the king of Israel, "This is what the Lord says. Because the Arameans think the Lord is a God of the hills and not a God of the valleys, I will deliver this vast army into your hands, and you will know that I am the Lord."
Okay, thank you, Bonnie. And now that's exactly what happened. Ben-Hadad is captured. He's set free on the condition that he returns to Israel, the cities that had been captured during the reign of his father, Omri, and that Israel would be allowed to set up a market in Damascus. Now, one would think that after acquiring this vast territory in a victory given by God, Ahab would have been content, but this wasn't the case. Evidently, as we get to chapter 21, Ahab's in another royal residence. This one, in addition to the one in Samaria, this one is located in the north of Israel, somewhere near the valley of Jezreel. And located very close to this palace is a field owned by a man named Naboth. Now, it was Ahab's plan to buy this field and plant a vegetable garden for the supply of his royal residence. Of course, the nearness of the field didn't really make any difference when you consider that Ahab wouldn't have been doing any of the work, and the vegetables could have been brought in from any number of fields. What really seems to be the issue is that the field was close by and he wanted to look at it. Ahab evidently wanted to be able to look out his window and view all that was his. I really believe he wanted to be able to walk about the palace and view everything that he owns. So he offers to buy the field. Now, I think we should mention that there's nothing wrong in and of itself with wanting to add to his estate. After all, there must have been some desire for something before any buying or selling occurs. Even the virtuous woman of Proverbs 31 considers a field and buys it. So Ahab's desire for this field seems to be within bounds. There isn't anything wrong, additionally, with the terms offered by Ahab. In fact, they seem to be pretty generous. Basically, he tells Naboth to name his price. Whatever he wants, whether it's a better vineyard or just the cash, Ahab's willing to cooperate. But Nahab's response evidently takes Ahab off guard. Not only does he refuse to part with the vineyard, but he does so for religious reasons. Bonnie, would you read verse 3 again, please?
But Naboth replied, "The Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers."
Okay, now the reason given is a religious issue. And that religious issue is from the fact that God gave the land of Canaan to the nation of Israel as a trust. In other words, each family received a portion of land as a direct grant from God. And according to the law, this land could not be sold except in cases of extreme poverty. And then when the year of Jubilee came around, once every 50 years, it had to be returned to the original owner. In fact, the claim of the family on the land is so strong that even before the year of Jubilee, someone could at any time come forward and buy the land back and return it to the original owner. Now, what that means is that if Naboth had agreed to sell the land, particularly to someone like Ahab, who didn't fear the Lord and who wouldn't have recognized the claims of the original family on it, he would have been violating the law of God, for he would have been transferring his inheritance from one family to another. That's why he refused Ahab's offer with an oath. "The Lord forbid," he says, "that I should do this." Now, Ahab, Joel and I were just talking about this before class started. I don't like Ahab very much because Ahab is acting like a spoiled child. And because he is just thinking only of himself, he evidently understands none of this. I think, in fairness, he understood the law and the reason behind Naboth's refusal, but he didn't take it seriously. In other words, I think he was angry because he couldn't see what the big deal was about. Naboth just wants to hold on to his land. Excuse me just a moment. In the mind of Ahab, Naboth just wants to hang on to his land, and he's using some phony baloney religious reason as justification. That's the way he's looking at it. The real important thing for Ahab is that somebody told him no. So he goes into his room and sulks. And we can see that this is going to cause him a lot of trouble. Remember the big idea: watch over your heart with diligence, for from it flows the springs of life. Well, we're going to see what problems come because of Ahab's childish attitude. Bonnie, would you read for us, please, verses 5 through 16?
His wife Jezebel came in and asked him, "Why are you so sullen? Why won't you eat?" He answered her, "Because I said to Naboth the Jezreelite, 'Sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard in its place.' But he said, 'I will not give you my vineyard.' Jezebel, his wife, said, 'Is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite.' So she wrote letters in Ahab's name, placed his seal on them, and sent them to the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city with him. In those letters she wrote, 'Proclaim a day of fasting and seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people, but seat 2 scoundrels opposite him and have them testify that he has cursed both God and the king. Then take him out and stone him to death.' So the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city did as Jezebel directed in the letters she had written to them. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth in a prominent place among the people. Then 2 scoundrels came and sat opposite him and brought charges against Naboth before the people, saying, 'Naboth has cursed both God and the king.' So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, 'Naboth has been stoned and is dead.' As soon as Jezebel heard that Naboth had been stoned to death, she said to Ahab, 'Get up and take possession of the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite that he refused to sell you. He is no longer alive, but dead.' When Ahab heard that Naboth was dead, he got up and went down to take possession of Naboth's vineyard."
Right, thank you. Now, we've been studying now several weeks in the life of Elijah, and every time Jezebel comes on the scene, things take a decided turn for the worst, and this is no exception. She intends from the start to do whatever is necessary to get the vineyard for her husband Naboth. And to be completely candid, Jezebel reminds me of a more recent ruler in the way she uses religion to further her own ends. I bet you didn't know this. Most people don't, but Adolf Hitler made free use of Christian vocabulary. He talked about the blessing of the Almighty and the Christian confessions, which would become pillars of the new government. He assumed the earnestness of a man weighed down by historic responsibilities. He handed out pious stories to the press, especially the church papers. He held up his tattered Bible and declared that he drew the strength for his great work from it, as scores of pious people welcomed him as a man sent from God. Adolf Hitler was a master of outward religion with no inward reality. And by the way, brothers and sisters, we have to be careful and show some discernment ourselves. Just because someone quotes a Bible verse doesn't mean their heart's right with the Savior. We can't just follow people that use the right words. We have to make discerning choices. Well, here, Jezebel uses the ruse of a religious assembly to bring a false accusation against Naboth so that he's killed. And she's mighty cavalier about it when she does it. She writes a letter in Ahab's name to the leaders of Naboth's city to proclaim a fast. Now, in doing this, they would have been stating that some terrible calamity was about to strike their community. And therefore, there should be an assembly to determine who's responsible for this tragedy and to see if there was some way of turning back the wrath of God, which was about to fall. So when this assembly is called, Naboth is seated in a prominent place, probably to make it easier for the false witnesses to point him out. And they charge him with two crimes, blasphemy and treason. Both are punishable by death. Now, if they stoned him the way the law dictates that they stone him, the accusers would have had to be the first ones to pick up the stones and throw them. I mention this just to point out how cold and heartless these men would have to be. To look someone in the eye, knowing that they're innocent, to listen to their pleas, and then to personally lead the crowd in stoning them anyway. Stoning was a terrible death. When people died from stoning, multiple bones are broken, the jaw is usually broken, they're hit in the head with rocks. It's a terrible way to die. But as bad as these guys were that led the crowd in stoning Naboth, you have to admit that Ahab was just as bad. Now, certainly Jezebel's the one that masterminded this plot. There were other men who carried it out. But Ahab doesn't seem the least concerned when he learns that Naboth is dead. He doesn't ask any questions. He just gets up and goes to claim the now ownerless piece of land. And all of this is because he coveted. That's why our main idea, watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flows the springs of life. If he had not coveted, none of this would have happened. Well, let's continue the story, 17 through 26, please, Bonnie.
Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite. Go down to meet Ahab, king of Israel, who rules in Samaria. He is now in Naboth's vineyard, where he has gone to take possession of it. Say to him, this is what the Lord says. Have you not murdered a man and seized his property? Then say to him, this is what the Lord says. In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood. Yes, yours. Ahab said to Elijah, so you have found me, my enemy. I have found you, he answered, because you have sold yourself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord. I'm going to bring disaster on you. I will consume your descendants and cut off from Ahab every last male in Israel, slave or free. I will make your house like that of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, and that of Baasha, son of Ahijah, because you have provoked me to anger and have caused Israel to sin. And also concerning Jezebel, the Lord says, dogs will devour Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel. Dogs will eat those belonging to Ahab who die in the city, and the birds of the air will feed on those who die in the country. There was never a man like Ahab, who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, urged on by Jezebel his wife. He behaved in the vilest manner, and by going after idols like the Amorites, the Lord drove out before Israel. When Ahab heard these words, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth, and fasted. He lay in sackcloth and went around meekly. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah the Tishbite. Have you noticed how Ahab has humbled himself before me? Because he has humbled himself, I will not bring this disaster in his day, but I will bring it on his house in the days of his son.
Okay, thank you, honey. Now notice that Ahab evidently had no trouble easing his conscience by stating that, really he had nothing to do with it after all. He merely turned his face to the wall and didn't eat. It was Jezebel that did the whole thing. Oh, certainly, she asked for the royal seal, but that's not so unusual in and of itself. She'd done that lots of times before. How was he to know what was written on what she sent? It certainly was a great pity, of course, that Ahab died the way he died, but after all, nothing could be done about that now, so we might as well take advantage of the situation. After all, it's only right that Ahab should have had the vineyard in the first place. That's the way Ahab would have thought, but we get a clearer picture by seeing God's assessment of the situation. In verse 19, God clearly lays the blame squarely on the shoulders of Ahab. And this is important for us to see in this age of plausible deniability. Someone in power will desire some illegal act be done, but will be unwilling to risk the action themselves. So they call in a subordinate and they say, look, we got a situation here. It needs to be taken care of. I'd like you to see to it personally, use anything of mine that you need, only don't bother me about it again. I don't want to know. Well, God, the righteous judge, sees through that, and he pronounces judgment upon it. And it's at this part of the story that we see our friend Elijah. The last time we saw him, he was hiding in a cave, afraid for his life because of the threats of Jezebel. But not now. Here he is again, boldly taking a stand for righteousness, unbowed before the powers of this world. Now, we don't know exactly how long Elijah had been out of the spotlight since chapter 19. Clearly, God had used another prophet for his message in chapter 20. But now we see Elijah, still well known to the king, confronting him once more. And did you notice that Ahab's hatred for Elijah has now turned personal? In chapter 19, Ahab calls Elijah the troubler of Israel. But now he calls him my enemy. There's a personalness about it. Now, of course, if Ahab had been a righteous man, he would have had nothing to fear from Elijah. The only reason for this antagonism now is because one of them was a righteous man who refused to compromise, and one was a wicked man who refused to act righteously. And that kind of situation arises all the time. When you take a stand for righteousness, you find yourself suddenly hated for it. Let's read, Bonnie, would you read for us, please, John 15, verses 18 to 20. John 15, verses 18 to 20.
John 15, verse 18. If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belong to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember the words I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also.
Okay, now notice that's been going on since the history of the church. If you want to see the right attitude toward persecution, I love this letter that the early church father Jerome sent to that great bishop of Hippo, Augustine. In 418, Jerome wrote this: your fame is worldwide. Catholics revere you as a second founder of the faith. And what is a mark of greater fame? All the heretics hate you. Well, true to form, Ahab meets Elijah with the words, my enemy. Now, this could be because he was afraid of Elijah. After all, an innocent man was just killed because he refused to sell a vineyard. But Naboth couldn't be considered an enemy of the king. And the charge doesn't affect Elijah in the slightest. He's perfectly at peace with the message he's sent to deliver. Because Ahab was about to learn that God judges the thoughts and the intentions of the heart. By meeting Ahab at the scene of the crime, the vineyard, Ahab had a foretaste of the day when God will judge men's secrets. The author of Hebrews tells us this: nothing in all creation is hidden from God's sight. Everything is uncovered and laid bare before the eyes of him to whom we must give an account. And so so Elijah gives them the message: Ahab, you and Jezebel are about to become dog food. Because of the crimes you've committed, your dynasty is going to end, and no one from your line is ever going to sit on the throne any longer. Well, I have to admit that when we get to verse 27 to 29, I really wish that wasn't included in the text. Ahab is uniformly presented in Scripture as a weak-willed, corrupt, petty little tyrant. And as I said previously, I really don't like him. And so there's part of me that really desires to see him get his for what he's done. But there's another part of me, the better part, I suppose, that's glad that God included these verses in the text. For even when we're told there never was a man like Ahab who sold himself to do evil in the eyes of the Lord, this man still finds grace. In Ezekiel 33, the prophet Ezekiel records this: as I live, declares the Lord God, I take no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but rather that the wicked would turn from his way and live. And that's exactly what's happening. Ahab humbled himself before God, and God postponed the judgment that was most surely coming. And may I say that God is still looking for repentance in the Ahabs like me and the Ahabs like you. Beloved, now's the day of grace. God is merciful to all who will receive his mercy, but his justice doesn't sleep forever. We need to remember that we must watch over our hearts with all diligence, or from it flow the springs of life. Well, does anybody have any questions or comments before we quit for this day? All righty, well, let's close in prayer. Father, we thank you that Ahab received grace, because it shows that there is no sinner that is so bad that your grace cannot reach them. Help us, O God, to learn from this, to not be afraid of the Ahabs of this world, but also, O God, to recognize that when we sin, and we do sin, that there is always grace with you. Keep us well and safe, O God, until we gather together this next Lord's Day. I ask this in Jesus' name, and all God's people said, amen.
Amen.
All right, beloved, see you next week.
Thanks, Brother Bruce. See you next
Thank
week.
you, Bruce.
Good stuff.